Hey everyone, I'm Chelsie Leininger, and today I'm going to be teaching you about student proficiency testing and why it is used. So my experience with this is I work at a school in Houston County, and we serve a lot of students who come from really traumatic backgrounds and just really rough home situations. And oftentimes education is not a priority with these students. It's not their own fault. It's just that, and it's just something that there's so many things that are going on at home that they have other responsibilities to take care of. And also sometimes the parents, they're just intimidated with school because maybe they struggled as a student. So when I'm teaching these students, I have a super important job of making sure they value their education. They can see that value. And so I really strive to help them make goals for themselves, and I want to build relationships with them and help find their interest. And then I want to use their interest for my lessons, incorporate their interest in my lessons to kind of reel them in. And I talk to them all the time about, just wait until you achieve, and it's going to feel so good. You're going to be so proud of yourself. And so when we had our big MAP test, that was something I always talked about, was like, just wait till you're going to be so proud of the growth that you made. Because the MAP test, it does focus on their achievement, but our school focuses on their growth. And so I say you are only competing against yourself. So I would say one of the most difficult things that we have to experience at my school is this achievement gap that I mentioned. The gap is slowly being closed throughout the 7 years that I've been there, but especially within the last 3 years. And although many of our students are in low-level ranges of achievement, our growth has been outstanding. So our school has been towards the top of the list when it comes to growth this past year, and I was just really proud of seeing them so high up on the list because we were always at the bottom for growth and achievement. I do believe that when teachers are constantly talking about testing, it causes a lot of anxiety in the classroom. And when the test finally gets there, the students just feel sick to their stomach. They dread it. They're ready to be done with it. But I think that when teachers approach standardized testing in a positive way, that students are less likely to suffer from testing anxiety. I've found it to be really important to provide strategies and speaking positive words of affirmation to my students daily. And when they build themselves up and look at a test as a way to compete against themselves, it really opens up their door to be successful and to have a good testing experience. So proficiency testing, according to McCarthy et al. In 2019, stated that proficiency testing has not always been around, and it was actually first introduced in 1976 when only 4 states had laws on regulating these types of assessments. And now, almost 50 years later, each state has laws and regulations that must be followed by schools pertaining to performance-based testing. The state does have control over deciding the standards that each grade level is responsible for teaching, and students are given mandatory assessments grading their proficiency over the understanding of the standards. So since standardized testing is highly stressful for students, some school districts have considered other methods to assess a student, like using a portfolio to show their knowledge and understanding. Although there are other ways to assess students and gather information about their understanding, many districts continue to use standardized tests due to the support it receives from the federal government. It is mentioned by the authors that under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, that each state is responsible for administering high-quality assessments in the core subjects like reading, math, language arts, and science. These assessments must align with the standards given for each specific grade level, and they must provide multiple ways for students to show their understanding. And so all that also came from McCarthy et al. And some of the ways that students are assessed are multiple choice, short answer, true, false, the ones that, were really big when I was a kid. But now they have included extended response, error analysis, and writing the steps in a mathematics problem. So like writing actual number words and their thinking, showing their thinking in words of how they solved a problem. So when I read the fact about, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So what are the effects on students, parents, and teachers? Student testing has caused a lot of students and teachers anxiety due to the amount of information that is just covered in one school year. It's so much information. And just not knowing what's going to be on the assessment. So many of the tests are weighed heavily, and they follow or track students throughout their education. Assessments have become stressful to parents, causing a movement in 2014, which I did not know about. And this movement, parents were able to opt out of their child taking certain assessments created by the district or state. And many students were denied their diploma due to not making adequate proficiency on their test. But since 2017, a lot of schools have declined that way of determining if a child gets to graduate or not. So if a child, might be a really weak test taker, or they didn't do so well on a test because maybe they didn't have breakfast, or maybe they had a really rough morning, they take other things into consideration, like how have their grades been throughout the school year. According to Zabriskie, who wrote an article in Education Week, 15 states have switched to another way of assessing students, which was actually where students take almost like a citizenship test. So this citizenship test has questions that immigrants who are wanting to become Americans are questioned on. And they did this because they were saying so many Americans really don't know the history of America, and they don't know a lot about the government. And so they passed in this way some of the states passed this way to be assessed at the end of the school year to determine if a student can graduate. So the states that are in blue, those are the states that have adopted that way of assessing. And the states that are in green, they are proposing states of that way of assessing. So here are some of the sample questions that are asked on the assessment. And some of them, are questions that most people would probably know. But some of them, people might not know the answers to those. So I think it's a good way to get people understanding America a little bit more. Why are proficiency tests being used? So these proficiency tests or high-stake tests are being used to help shape the way instruction's formed. State, school districts, students, and grade levels are being compared to one another by looking at the data from these assessments. One thing I will say, it is so frustrating, different grade levels will be compared, and then also some grade levels will have a really rough crew, and the whole, every year that they move up, that's the rough crew. And so sometimes it's hard because you're being compared to other grade levels, but also different districts are compared to one another, and different schools and house and county. I mean, we are being compared to other schools as well. So that's just a common thing when it comes to these high stakes tests. Some states evaluate teachers based on the outcomes of their students' data, and this leads to a lot of teachers saying you know what, my kids aren't going to be tested on social studies and science in third grade, so I'm not going to cover a lot of it. And that's just the unfortunate truth. And so anyways, it causes a lot of teachers to stress. What is the history on proficiency tests? According to our textbook, so I read that there were 4 states, I believe. Yeah, 4 states that started this proficiency testing legislation. So I was just Googling, about this, and I ended up finding that in 1975, California, as a way to, and they started it for a different reason, as a way to help with attendance and to save money because school was expensive, they had this proficiency test that they gave. And students could take this around 16, 17 years of age. And if they passed at those ages, they were able to graduate from, they were graduating from high school. They did not get an actual diploma, but they got this state of California high school certificate of proficiency, which was, equivalent to a diploma. And so the parents, in order for this to happen, the parents had to agree to it. They had to agree that they were okay with their student being out of school. And so they were ready for this. They were like, we're going to save so much money on this. And they predicted a lot of students would want to get out of school early. So in March of 1976, around 670,000 students were eligible to take this test. but only 18,465 students took the assessment. And out of that group of students, only 32% passed, which is only 5,976 students. And so they found after this study was done that many parents were against it. They weren't okay with their kids getting out of school early, like 2 years early. The majority of the students really weren't even ready to leave school because they wanted to enjoy their high school career. And a lot of the students who were willing to take that test, they were students who, probably had to be the caretakers at home, or they wanted to start their careers early. So this is this is an example of what a certificate looked like. And these are some of the questions that were asked. And so I found this one really interesting. A housewife will pay the lowest price per ounce for rice if she buys it at the store, which offers A, B, C, or D. But I thought it was funny that they included the word housewife. So now let's talk about legal cases when it comes to state testing or standardized testing. The first legal case, I'm sure so many teachers have heard of this. This was a little bit before I graduated with my bachelor's and I was about to start teaching myself. There was this huge scandal in Atlanta. And there were like 34 teachers, I think more than that, like 200 something teachers in another news article or a news clipping I listened to. But they ended up selecting 34 teachers they were accused in this big cheating scandal in 2013. And 11 teachers actually ended up being convicted of racketeering, theft, and false statements, as well as an assortment of other charges. And so Beverly Hall, she was a superintendent at the time. And I guess she had received all these awards in the past. She was like really well known in the education group. And she like really weighed those tests so heavily on teachers and would fire teachers for not having high enough scores. And so they would have these like bubble parties where they would just go in and like change the answers before submitting these scores. And teachers ended up getting rewards financially. Like they would be awarded money for their test being so high. So many teachers fell into this pressure and this cheating scandal. And anyways, it was just really bad. And I learned that she later ended up passing away. But this is a video right here. This is just like a little clipping from a news station. The last case I'm going to talk about is a case with Megan Renee. She ended up receiving special education services from the time she was in first grade. And she was with other students who also had disabilities. And so they had taken a test, a high-stakes test, earlier in the year, and they all did really bad on this test, and they were not actually given their they were not given their accommodations, and they should have had the test read to them, and they did not. And so all of them failed, and they were told that like now all of a sudden you guys have to pass this test in order to get your diploma. And they were like, what? This has never been a thing in the past. Like, we've never had to pass this test to graduate. Students with special education services have never had to pass this test. And so they ended up taking this to court. And they stated, like, we were denied some of our test-taking accommodations and our modifications in a previous test, and we weren't allowed our calculators. And so I was kind of surprised. The state actually said that they still had to take their test. And they mentioned that it was okay that the school took away some of their accommodations, but they did say that the test does have to be read to them. So many teachers are left wondering, and this goes back to that first slide, or the first slide about the laws, or the legal case. But a lot of people are left wondering, why do teachers get caught up with tampering with student scores? And I will say, much of the high-stakes testing stems from No Child Left Behind when President George W. Bush was in office, as well as the Race to the Top when President Obama was in office. And scores had to increase, or else teachers would suffer these really awful consequences and often their careers. And students suffered from this, and so did administration, so it was just very stressful. I'm so grateful for the MAP assessment. I think it's great that they look at the growth and achievement. I think growth is huge. Like, in order to achieve, you have to grow first. And so anyways, that is what I learned. Here are my references, and I hope that you enjoyed. Bye.